Ethan Cross stood at the window of his Manhattan office, the skyline stretching endlessly before him. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him, flashing with a name he hadn't seen in over 3 years. Madeline Harper. He glanced at it, debating whether to let it ring out, but instead he picked it up. Ethan. Her voice came through smooth and polished. Still too busy saving the world one hedge fund at a time? What do you want, Madeline? He asked, his tone flat. I just thought you should know. I'm getting engaged, she said with deliberate sweetness. We're throwing a little celebration. Naturally, you're invited. He didn't respond. She laughed lightly. Oh, come on, Ethan. It's been 3 years since we ended things, and you still haven't found anyone? Or are you just so emotionally detached that no woman can tolerate you for more than a dinner reservation? That's none of your business, he replied. Oh, but it is, she said smoothly. I told everyone you'd come alone. I mean, it's your thing, right? Stoic, proud, incapable of real connection. Unless you shock us all, maybe show up with someone. That is, if anyone's willing to pretend to love you for one evening. He stared out at the skyline, his jaw tightening. You'll be surprised, he said quietly. Good, she replied. I like surprises. The call ended. Ethan remained still, the glow of the city reflecting in his eyes. This wasn't about her engagement. It was a test, a game, and he had no intention of losing. If she expected him to walk into that party alone, he'd make sure to walk in with someone she'd never expect, someone unforgettable. The next morning, Ethan found himself wandering through Central Park, the sharp chill in the air doing little to quiet the thoughts buzzing in his head. Last night's phone call with Madeline had left a storm brewing inside him, and for once the polished glass and steel of his office felt too tight. He needed air. He needed clarity. Or maybe he just needed to walk without thinking. Somewhere, near the Bethesda fountain, faint music carried on the breeze. It wasn't just background noise. It pulled him, like a thread woven into something heavier. The voice was soft but strong, raw in a way studio recordings never captured. It was the kind of sound that could make a stranger stop and forget where they were. He followed the melody until he saw her. She stood beneath a tall lamppost, guitar slung over her shoulder, singing to no one in particular. Her chestnut hair was loose and wild, her denim jacket frayed at the cuffs, boots worn thin. Her guitar case lay open at her feet, with a handful of crumpled bills and a few coins inside. She sang like it didn't matter if anyone heard, like the song needed to be sung whether the world listened or not. When she finished, she looked up and saw him watching. You've got a voice, Ethan said. I've got a name too, she replied, a little defensive. Claire, he nodded. Ethan. She looked him up and down, skeptical. Finance guy, corporate, something uptight. Close enough, he said. I don't play private events, she added flatly. I'm not here for a show. I have a proposal, Ethan said. I don't do anything shady. Nothing illegal, just unusual. Claire raised an eyebrow. Go on. I need a date. Just one night. A party. She laughed, quick and sharp. You don't strike me as the type who can't find someone to bring to a party. It's not just any party. It's my ex's engagement party. She's expecting me to show up alone. She crossed her arms. And you want me to play Cinderella for a night? You'd be paid well, he said. More than well. Enough to help you out, maybe even change a few things. Claire narrowed her eyes. Why me? Because you don't belong in her world. And that's exactly what makes you stand out. So you're trying to humiliate your ex? I'm trying to take something back. Not from her, but from what I let go. She shook her head. I sing on sidewalks, Ethan. I don't belong in crystal ballrooms and 5-star venues. That's why you'll shine, he said. Claire let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. That's a great line. Then Ethan said quietly, I'll cover your mother's hospital bills. Her smile vanished. Her posture stiffened. How do you know about that? She asked. I don't, he admitted. But I saw your expression change when someone dropped a $5 bill instead of a 1. Just a guess. Claire didn't respond right away. She studied him, searching for a lie. She didn't find one. You're serious? I am, Ethan said. One night, a few hours. I'll handle everything. She exhaled slowly. Then she nodded. But you better make it worth it, Suit. He gave a rare smile. I will. The boutique on Madison Avenue shimmered with soft lighting and gold-trimmed mirrors. Claire stood stiffly in front of a floor-length mirror, awkward in the way people get when they're not used to being fussed over. A stylist hovered nearby with pins and fabric samples, chirping enthusiastically about necklines and silhouettes. Claire had already tried on half a dozen dresses, each more delicate, sparkly, and expensive than the last, but none of them felt like her. Ethan sat a few feet away on a modern white couch, dressed in tailored gray slacks and a navy shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to make him look both powerful and relaxed. He didn't say much during the fittings, he just watched. Not in a judgmental way, but as if he was trying to figure something out. The stylist clapped her hands. This next one is it. Trust me. Claire stepped behind the curtain, re-emerging, moments later in a deep forest green gown. It hugged her figure without trying too hard, and the neckline framed her collarbones like it had been tailored just for her. She stood there for a second, quiet, surprised by her own reflection. Ethan stood slowly. That one. Claire looked down at herself. Feels a little too princess. You're playing the part, Ethan said. But you still look like you. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin, weathered leather bracelet, frayed, faded, holding the kind of value no money could ever replace. I'm keeping this on, she said. My mom gave it to me. Ethan didn't flinch. It works. By the time they finished at the boutique, the sun had begun to sink. The city outside glowed in gold and steel. Ethan checked his watch. I don't have time for dinner out, but I cook, he said. We still need to run through our story. Claire arched an eyebrow. You cook? I do. Ethan's apartment was exactly how Claire imagined it, sleek, modern, and organized like a showroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the soft hum of traffic below barely audible through the glass. The furniture was minimalist and expensive-looking, all muted tones and clean lines. But it was the kitchen that made her stop. You sure you actually cook in here? She asked, eyeing the marble countertops and polished steel appliances. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with faint kitchen scars. Used to cook every night when my mom was sick, it stuck. Claire opened a drawer and blinked. You alphabetized your spices? Efficiency, he said with a slight smirk. She laughed under her breath. You're definitely a serial killer. While he started chopping onions with practiced ease, Claire grabbed a knife and tried to copy him. The moment she applied pressure, her slices flew across the counter. She yelped, dropped the knife, and held up her hands in surrender. Okay, I'm officially banned from all sharp objects. Ethan chuckled, walked over, and gently guided her hands. Like this. Curl your fingers in. Firm grip. She tried again under his guidance, her movements still clumsy but improving. As he prepped the sauce, Claire sneezed, wiping tears from her eyes. How do you not cry cutting onions? Experience, he said, and years of emotional suppression. She knocked over the salt jar. Granules spilled across the counter like glitter. She groaned. Perfect, she muttered. Now I've ruined it. Ethan grabbed a towel and cleaned it up without comment. Consider it extra flavor, he said. A little chaos added to a perfect plan. She gave him a side glance. You don't get mad easily, do you? I've learned not to. Soon, pasta simmered on the stove. Fresh herbs sizzled in the pan, and the scent of garlic and basil filled the room. They moved in sync, not perfectly, but with rhythm. By the time they sat down at the small dining table, it smelled like a 5-star restaurant. So, Ethan said, refilling her glass of water, Madeline's going to ask what you do. I'll say I'm a singer. Street corners, open mics, maybe a birthday party for someone's dog. Say you sing to live, he replied. not to impress. Claire tilted her head. You like correcting people, don't you? I like clarity. They ate in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that felt light instead of heavy. Then, she lifted her glass. A toast, he raised his. To what? She grinned. To poverty, the only reason we're not drinking wine. They clinked glasses. To low expectations, Ethan added. And the thrill of pretending, she said, softly. He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just acting anymore. It didn't feel like pretend. The grand ballroom shimmered under a cascade of chandeliers, casting soft golden light over crystal glassware, ivory linens, and designer gowns. Waitstaff moved like clockwork, dressed, in black and white, gliding through the space with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Conversations buzzed, low, cultured, confident. Ethan walked in first, composed, every step measured. He wore a black tailored suit, sleek and understated, but his expression gave nothing away. When Claire stepped in beside him, everything changed. She wore the deep forest green gown like it had been woven from moonlight. Her hair was pulled into a loose twist, a few curls falling artfully along her cheek. No diamonds sparkled at her ears, no pearls around her neck. Just her mother's worn leather bracelet quietly wrapped around, her wrist, and yet, heads turned. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused in midair. People noticed. Ethan offered her his arm. She took it with a confident, almost amused smirk. You look like you planned this, she whispered. I did, he replied under his breath. Near the center of the room, Madeline stood surrounded by guests in couture and champagne flutes. When she caught sight of Ethan, her smile froze. Her gaze shifted to Claire and narrowed. Ethan, she greeted, voice drenched in mock warmth. You found someone interesting? Claire offered a polite nod. Madeline's eyes scanned her from the bracelet to the shoes, her smile tightening. Did you pick her up outside a subway station, or does she just dress up well for special occasions? Ethan's jaw flexed, but before he could speak, Claire laid a gentle hand on his arm. Her signal. I perform outside subway stations sometimes, Claire said, her tone even. The acoustics are surprisingly good. Madeline blinked. So, a street performer. How quaint. Claire's smile didn't budge. If by quaint you mean unforgettable, then yes. For a second, Ethan caught himself smirking. Before Madeline could reply, Claire turned slightly, guiding them away. They moved through the crowd toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the city. Claire exhaled. Your ex has sharp claws. She's always been a collector, Ethan said quietly, of people, of status. She likes things that shine, until they don't. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward an older couple seated nearby, holding hands gently across the table. Their faces were weathered but kind, eyes soft with shared memories. Without a word, Claire walked over and leaned in slightly. Happy anniversary, she said after overhearing bits of their conversation. The woman lit up. 52 years today. Claire smiled. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small sketch pad and pencil. In swift, sure strokes, she began to draw. Ethan watched her from across the room, unmoving, a glass of water in his hand. He didn't interrupt. He didn't smile. He just watched. When she handed the couple the sketch, two gentle faces beneath, an arch of stars, the woman gasped, covering her mouth with her fingers. Her husband blinked, visibly moved. Claire touched the woman's shoulder gently, then turned and walked back to Ethan. He stood and pulled out her chair without a word. She sat. He pushed it in. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them said enough. Before Claire could even sip her water, Madeline's voice rang across the ballroom, syrupy and loud enough to cut through the music. Claire, was it? She called, wearing a smile so polished it looked painted on. Would you sing something for us? I mean, since you perform in public, you must enjoy an audience. Ethan's shoulders tensed, his eyes narrowing slightly, but Claire placed her hand on his again. Steady, unfazed. Of course, she said, rising from her seat. The room shifted. Conversations died down. Guests turned to watch as she walked, calmly across the floor, poised and unbothered. A waiter appeared with a handheld microphone. The pianist, already seated, looked up at her with a slight nod. "Do you know Moon River?" she asked softly. He nodded once. His fingers met. The keys. The first notes floated into the air, soft and trembling like the first breath before a confession. Claire closed her eyes and began to sing. Her voice wasn't flashy. It didn't rise with bravado. It unfolded like a ribbon, delicate, rich, and honest. Every word held weight. Every line seemed stitched with memory and longing. The kind of voice that doesn't demand attention, it earns it. One by one, glasses were lowered. Conversations stopped. Even the waitstaff paused mid-step. Ethan felt something shift inside him. The sound moved through him like wind rustling the leaves of something he hadn't known was still alive. He wasn't watching a performance. He was witnessing truth. Across the room, Madeline stood still. Her smile faltered, her grip around her glass tightening. And yet she couldn't look away. When the final note faded, there was a beat of complete silence, too long, too full. Then the applause began. Startled at first, then real, sincere, rising. Claire bowed her head slightly and walked back to Ethan. She sat beside him, eyes lowered for a second. He leaned in. "You were unbelievable." "I just sang," she whispered. "No," he said. "You reminded them what real feels like." He didn't take her hand, didn't say anything more, but he didn't need to, because in that moment, neither of them was pretending anymore. The ballroom faded behind them as Ethan and Claire stepped out into the night. A light drizzle dusted the streets, the kind that made the city glow instead of soak. They walked side by side, the click of Claire's heels softened by the pavement, their shadows stretching under the glow of street lamps. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full, like a shared thought they didn't need to say out loud. Claire looked up at the dark sky. "Well, that was unexpected." Ethan chuckled under his breath. "You mean your performance, or Madeline's face during it?" "Both," she said, flashing a grin. Then she glanced sideways at him. "You okay? You've been quiet since we left." "I've been listening," he said, voice low, "to the way you silenced an entire room without raising your voice." The rain picked up slightly, turning from mist to droplets. Claire instinctively ducked her head, brushing her hair out of her face. But before she could say anything, Ethan slipped off his blazer and held it over her shoulders like a makeshift shield. "You'll get soaked," she said. "I'll survive," he replied with a small smile. "You sang for me. Least I can do." She looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. There was no edge to it, no calculation, just warmth. They kept walking, a little closer now. Not because of the rain, but because the silence between them had shifted. It wasn't filled with strategy or pretending or deals. It was something else. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said after a moment. "Of course. Are you still pretending?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked ahead, watching the sidewalk curve toward a quiet row of storefronts. A neon sign flickered faintly in the distance. Claire's bar. He exhaled slowly, his voice quiet. "I don't know what this is, but tonight, with you, I haven't felt this light in years. Not even when I thought I was in love before." She stared at him for a second, then looked away. "That's a good answer." They reached the familiar, door-worn wood, chipped red paint, and a faded sign that read Marlowe's. "I sing here every Saturday," Claire said. "Want to come in?" Ethan tilted his head. "You inviting me to see the real thing now?" She pushed open the door with a grin. "If you can handle it." Inside Marlowe's, the bar was warm and dim, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. The bartender gave Claire a nod of recognition. A couple of regulars offered small smiles as she walked past. It smelled like old wood, bourbon, and something comforting that couldn't be bottled. Claire handed Ethan his still damp blazer and slipped behind the velvet curtain at the side of the room. Minutes later, she reappeared on stage in jeans and a simple black tee, no glam, no makeup artists, no borrowed gowns. Just her. The lights dimmed slightly. She glanced at Ethan once, then began to sing. The voice was the same, but something about it had changed, more unguarded, more alive. She sang a bluesy tune, fingers tapping gently against her thigh, her voice teasing and honest all at once. It wasn't a performance, it was a release. And Ethan didn't look away. She wasn't dazzling by design, she was just real. And that was what held him. 2 nights later, everything felt different. The rooftop gala was a black tie affair, a sleek event at a glass-walled venue overlooking the skyline. The lights from the city below reflected like scattered stars across the marble floor. Claire stepped out of the elevator next to Ethan, her heels clicking softly as the doors closed behind them. She wore a dress chosen by one of Ethan's stylists. Elegant, understated, expensive. But the flutter in her chest wasn't from the fabric, it was from everything else. The people, the glances, the air that suddenly felt thinner. Ethan leaned close. "We're just going to talk, smile, and leave when you're ready. You don't have to prove anything." Claire nodded, grateful for the reassurance, but the second they stepped forward into the room, she felt the shift. Heads turned. Eyes lingered. A woman in a crimson gown leaned toward her partner, whispering behind a perfect manicure. A man in a gray suit glanced at her shoes, then away with a smirk. Ethan guided her toward the drinks table. "Champagne?" "Sparkling water," Claire said, quieter than usual. Within moments, Ethan's colleagues began approaching. They smiled, with corporate ease, voices polished from years of cocktail hours and boardroom diplomacy. "So Claire, what do you do? How did you two meet? Have you always lived in the city?" Claire answered each question calmly, with a careful grace, but every word felt like walking on glass. When she mentioned singing, one woman gave a practiced chuckle. "How charming," she said. "I do love a good dive bar performance." Ethan's jaw clenched. Claire has a gift. But she touched his arm gently, signaling him to let it go. Moments later, someone brought up private equity. Another bragged about skiing in the Alps. Claire nodded politely, said little. She didn't fit in, and she could feel it in her bones. An hour later, the music shifted to a jazz beat and couples began to dance. Ethan turned to her. "I need some air," Claire said, already walking toward the balcony. The time he reached her, she stood with her arms crossed against the cool breeze. Her hair was catching in the wind. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Don't be," Claire replied, still looking out over the city. "You didn't do anything wrong. But this..." She gestured toward the glass doors behind them, toward the world they'd just stepped out of. "This isn't my world, Ethan. I don't know how to breathe in it." "I thought you might enjoy it," he said gently. "I wanted you to see what it's like when you're with me." "And I saw it," she replied, turning to face him. "Cold lights, colder smiles. I don't want to feel like a novelty every time I speak." Ethan reached for her hand, but she took a step back. "I need real things," she said. "A place where I can sing and mean it. Where no one's waiting for me to trip just so they can feel better about themselves." He swallowed hard. "So, what do we do now?" Claire looked him in the eyes. "You go back in, I go home." And just like that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the elevator before he could say another word. The next day, Ethan sat in his office, staring out at the skyline with heavy eyes. The city looked the same, but something inside him felt dimmer. He hadn't slept, couldn't focus. Claire's words echoed through his thoughts, repeating in a loop he couldn't shut off. The door opened behind him. "Ethan," said his younger sister Julia. She stepped in with her usual elegance, perfect posture, tailored cream blazer, tablet in hand. Her voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it. He didn't turn. I'm busy. We need to talk, she said, walking toward his desk. About Claire. Ethan turned slowly. What about her? She's not right for you. His expression hardened. Excuse me? She's not your world, and you know it, Julia said, arms crossing tightly. You've worked your entire life to get here. Now you're risking your name, your image, your control, for someone who sings in bars and sketches strangers on napkins? Ethan's voice was low but steady. She's not a risk. She's the only thing that has made sense to me in a long time. She's not sustainable, Julia said firmly. People are already talking. Clients are asking questions. They think you've gone soft. That this, she waved a hand vaguely, is a distraction. Ethan stood. Maybe I want to be distracted. Maybe I'm tired of climbing some ladder that leads nowhere. Julia's voice softened slightly, but her stance didn't waver. She'll be crushed in our world, Ethan. She doesn't belong in it. And deep down, you know that. They didn't. Notice the office door had been left slightly ajar. Just outside, holding a brown paper bag with 2 containers of soup and fresh bread, Claire stood frozen. She had come to surprise him. After everything, she thought maybe they could talk, maybe laugh a little, just be real again. But the words she heard pierced through her like ice. She doesn't belong. Claire didn't wait for more. The bag slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the carpet. She turned and walked away, unnoticed, her heart pounding harder with each step until she was gone. Inside, Ethan returned to his desk, unaware of what had just slipped through his fingers. That night, he called her. Straight to voicemail, he texted. No response. He went to Marlowe's. The bartender shook his head. Haven't seen her in days. He checked the little cafe near the park, the bookstore she liked, even stood across from the old brick building where she lived. No sign of her, no music in the window, no sketchpad on the balcony, only silence. Days passed. He canceled meetings, skipped dinners, barely ate. His team covered for him while whispers in the firm grew louder, but none of it mattered. One evening he returned to the park, the same bench under the oak tree where she once told him she sang. Not for applause, but for anyone listening in the dark who might feel less alone. He sat there, alone now, holding the sketch she'd drawn of him from that first dinner night. It wasn't the version he saw in the mirror. It was the version she had seen. Gentle, quiet, honest. Someone worth knowing. Ethan traced the edge of the paper slowly. A breeze rustled the branches overhead. He whispered into the wind as if it could carry his words to wherever she was hiding. I'm sorry I let them speak louder than my heart. Then he stood, jaw clenched with purpose. If you won't come back to me, he murmured, I'll come find you. The city pulsed with life that Saturday afternoon. Street vendors lined the sidewalks, families wandered between booths, and the sound of distant music filled the air. It was a community charity event, unplanned, unpolished, and alive. Ethan had wandered aimlessly for hours, hoping to exhaust the ache that hadn't left his chest since Claire disappeared. He turned corners without direction, moving past children, with painted faces and old men selling used books. Then he heard it, a voice, familiar, honest. His feet stopped before his mind did. There, under a canopy of string lights and ivy, stood Claire. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tucked behind one ear, her mother's leather bracelet catching the afternoon sun. No stage lights, no microphones, just her, singing into the breeze, as if her voice belonged to the sky. People gathered, around, some standing, some swaying. The guitarist beside her strummed gently, but it was her voice, mournful and full of hope, that held them. It was a song about light in the shadow, about finding something worth believing in even when you've stopped looking. Ethan stepped forward. She opened her eyes mid-verse and saw him. Her voice caught, just slightly, but she kept going. He didn't. Stop walking until he stood just below the wooden platform, face tilted up toward her. As she sang the final line, silence swept through the crowd. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I told you once to help me pretend, to fool a room full of people into thinking we were in love," he said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "But the only person who got fooled was me." Claire stood frozen, hands trembling slightly around the neck of her guitar. "I thought I was just hiring someone to play a part," Ethan continued. "But you made me feel like a version of myself I forgot existed. You made me laugh. You made me think. You made me see the world with different eyes." He swallowed, his voice dipping lower. "And then I let people tell me you weren't enough. But the truth is, Claire, I was afraid I wasn't enough for you." Someone in the crowd let out a soft gasp. Claire blinked rapidly, eyes glassy. "I don't want to pretend anymore," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I don't care what parties you fit into or what people expect from me. I only care about what I feel when you sing. What I feel when I look at you, it's real. It's the only thing that's ever been real." Claire gently set her guitar down and placed the microphone on the nearby stool. Then she took a step forward and another, and when she reached the edge of the stage, she didn't speak. She just fell into his arms. The crowd erupted into applause around them, but neither of them heard it. Not clearly. They were holding on too tightly to everything they had nearly lost. "I'm sorry it took me so long," Ethan whispered into her hair. Claire looked up, tears slipping freely now. Her voice was quiet but certain. "I was just waiting for the truth." And in the middle of a city street surrounded by strangers and song, they found their way back. Not with perfect timing or grand gestures, but with honesty and the courage to finally listen. The neighborhood had changed. Not in a way you could measure in real estate listings or rising property values. It had changed in rhythm. Where sirens once echoed, there was now laughter. Where there had been boarded windows, there was music drifting out onto the street. At the heart of it all stood a small converted warehouse with a hand-painted sign above the door, Claire's Music Corner. Inside, children sat cross-legged with ukuleles too large for their hands. Some tapped at drums. Others sang quietly, guided by Claire's calm voice and patient smile. She moved between them, helping one child shape a chord, encouraging another who hummed off key. Classes were free. No child was turned away. What most people didn't know, what Claire never said, was that every instrument, every light bulb, every music stand had been quietly paid for by Ethan. He never put his name on anything. That wasn't the point. They lived in a modest apartment just a few blocks from the park. 2 rooms, a little balcony, a kitchen they both used but never quite managed to keep clean. Claire still tried to flip pancakes too early. Ethan still cleaned the counter without saying a word. Most nights she sang while he sat nearby with a notebook, scribbling lyrics he never thought he had inside him. They called it evening rehearsal, though most sessions ended in laughter and half-finished melodies. But one night felt different. Community concert had been organized at the park. No velvet ropes, no gala gowns. Just neighbors, picnic blankets, and strings of lights swinging in the breeze. Ethan sat in the middle row. No name tag, no title. Just jeans, sneakers, and a folded program in his lap. He watched as Claire walked up to the small wooden stage, her guitar slung across her back, the same leather bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. She looked toward the crowd and found him instantly. No one else mattered. She strummed a soft chord and began to sing. The song was new. One they'd written together on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by scribbled lyrics, takeout containers, and half-drunk mugs of tea. It wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about hope. It was about stillness, about finally finding somewhere you could land. Her voice wrapped around the park like a warm blanket. People stopped talking. Children leaned against their parents. Couples held hands. But Ethan didn't see the crowd. He only saw her. She wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending. She was home. As the final note faded, the audience erupted into applause. Claire bowed her head with a soft smile. Children from Her music class ran to the edge of the stage, cheering like she was a superhero. Ethan sat still, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes glistened, but he didn't wipe them. He smiled. A deep, quiet kind of smile that only comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Because he wasn't watching from the outside anymore. He belonged. To the music. To the moment. To her. And as she waved to the crowd, he whispered to himself, soft and sure, "She used to be the voice that made me stop. Now she's the reason I want to stay forever." As the last chord hung in the air, Claire stood under the park's string lights, smiling with quiet pride. The children from her music class gathered around her, their laughter rising like wind chimes in the night. She had just finished her final song, a lullaby of sorts, one she and Ethan had crafted together over late nights and shared silence. Ethan sat still in the front row, his hands folded, heart full. Not in the way wealth ever filled it, not with accomplishment or titles, but with something deeper, something rooted in truth. Love. Not the grand kind written into gala speeches or engagement announcements, the kind that stitched itself quietly into routines, into burnt pancakes and crumpled lyrics, into small moments no one else would ever see. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was their life. He watched as Claire stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by neighbors and students, each of them trying to thank her in their own way. She smiled at them all, her presence calm, grounded. She didn't have to command attention. She simply belonged. Eventually, she made her way to him. "You were amazing," he said as she reached him. She shrugged lightly. "I just sang," he shook his head. "You reminded them why music matters." She looked up at him. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." They walked back together, hand in hand through the quiet neighborhood. The streets were lit with porch lights and soft laughter. In the distance, someone strummed a guitar on a stoop. At home, Claire kicked off her shoes and hung her guitar gently, on the wall. Ethan poured them each a cup of tea just the way she liked it. Strong, with honey. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Later that night, as they lay side by side, Claire whispered, "Do you ever think about how it all started? That call from your ex?" He smiled faintly. "Madeline, I barely remember the party." "I do," she said. "I remember thinking you were completely insane." "I probably was." Claire turned on her side to face him. "But if you hadn't been..." He looked at her, his voice soft. "I'd still be pretending." And that was it. That was the truth of it all. He had found a woman who reminded him what it meant to feel, to stop living by expectation and start choosing honesty. And she had found a man who didn't try to polish her into something she wasn't. He just listened. Really, listened. As the moonlight filtered in through the window, Ethan reached across and gently took her hand. "She was once the voice that made me stop," he thought. "Now, she's the reason I never want to walk away again."